We'll start that.
And tell me when to stop talking.
No, it's fine, it's fine. Because I can just cut things out, so it's fine.
Okay.
Alright, so my first question was, like, what was your uncle's job in World War II, like in North Africa?
He worked for the Army Signal Corps department, and primarily he would go in after places were attacked and bombed, and after the front lines had moved on, and help reconnect communications.
Okay.
Because before he was drafted in 1942 at the age of 33, he worked for the New England Tel for 11 years.
Mm-hmm.
And he did some outside work, wiring poles and businesses and that kind of thing. So when he was drafted in 42, he went into the Signal Corps, which was their prime responsibility of communications behind the front lines. Not, I don't mean in enemy territory, but I mean after the attacking soldiers made gains on land and property and through towns and cities, he would go in and hook things up that had been ruined during the war.
Okay.
And the places he served were Morocco, Algeria, and Libya, all in North Africa.
Okay.
There's Libya, Algeria, and Morocco.
Okay. Do you know what it was like for him, like condition-wise, food-wise, if it was like tough to be there? Like what if they were like supplied with good food?
Things were tough. In fact, even civilians in this country had to make sacrifices as far as food was concerned, quantities and quality. And a lot of the food that they got were called sea rations, which were packages of food that had been prepared back in the States months before that. And they didn't have the advantage of fresh milk and hot meals all the time, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But it wasn't as bad as being under fire in combat. He wasn't involved with that part of it.
Okay. Did he send you like letters home or anything?
Occasionally. During World War II, they had something called V-mail. And if you had written a letter on 8.5 by 11 size paper, they would take a picture of it and reduce it to the size of a postcard and send that. That's what they used to send back to people in this country. And many times, in order to read it, you almost needed a magnifying glass. Also, all letters were censored. By that I mean they were reviewed by people in the military to make sure you weren't sending back any information that was could be used by the enemy.
Okay. How long was he in Africa for?
He went to Africa after boot camp in this state. He was in Africa the second half of 1942, and as the Allies moved the Germans westward along the coast of the Mediterranean, he advanced with the Allied forces. When he went there, the British were fighting the Germans. The German general was General Rommel, was probably the most capable general in the German army. Eventually they took Rommel, after they were forced out of Africa, Rommel took over the defense line in France that was subject to the attack on D-Day.
Okay.
As far as other things, we sent, the main thing I remember that he sent was something called a fez. You know what a fez is? It's one of those red hats with a flat top on it, and it's got a tassel on it. Some of the people in North Africa wear them today, and they're called fez, F-E-Z. Red, but he sent other things too, but I can't remember what they were. I'm not sure we got everything that he sent us either.
Okay, do you know what it was like in America at the time? Like being here, if it was like different because they were in the war?
Oh,
What
yeah.
it was like?
Because the U.S. went to war in end of December 41, the people in this country were asked to contribute in a number of different ways, and all food and all gasoline was rationed, and people in this country got different colored tokens. And out of buy gasoline, you were limited to, I think, 5 gallons a month. And when you bought gasoline, besides giving them the money for it, you had to give them a token to make sure that you weren't using more gasoline than you were authorized. And the same went for food. They had different colored tokens for meat and produce. There wasn't much fresh produce, but things like dairy products, eggs and butter were restricted, and you only could buy so much with tokens during the war. So they expected all the civilian forces to go through some degree of hardship like the people in the service were going through.
Okay. Were the jobs any different during World War II since everyone was like at war? Like when it started, were there a lot more jobs opened up?
Yes, in fact, not only in Hingham had a shipbuilding yard that made a lot of smaller warships, many of which were lend-leased to the British, and they also had a large ammunition depot. So after the ships were built and fitted, they would bring them out into Hingham Harbor, and then they would bring ammunition from another part of Hingham out on flatbed ships and load the ships out in the harbor with the ammunition. They didn't load them at the shipyard where the ships were being built and manufactured.
Okay. Is there anything else that you have to like say or?
He, when he was in Africa, he commented that the climate along the coast was quite bearable, but not far inland. I'm talking maybe 10 to 20 miles inland. There it was all desert and the edges of the Sahara. And he was saying how troublesome it was to try and travel inland in any way. For the most part, most of the occupation of countries in Africa or along the Mediterranean coast, and very few could live in the desert where there was no water.
All right.
That's about it.
Thank you.
What do you do? Have to do something for school?